Okay, I think we can start now. We have all the panel members are available and also about 70 participants now on board. First of all, good afternoon to all of you. My name is Ashok in start, quite a long name. So in short, Ashok, I'm the acting director of the Australia-India Institute and also the Assistant Deputy Vice Chancellor International at the University of Melbourne. I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land on which the University of Melbourne and the Australia-India Institute are located. I acknowledge and pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. First, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to the panel members, Professor Robin Badham, Dr. Surinder Singh, Professor Maria Rua, and Professor Michael Ulmenstein for their generous contribution to this program and for their willingness to share their expertise with us. I would like to extend a warm welcome to all the participants. Finally, I have the privilege to introduce Professor Robin Badham, who will be chairing this panel and also moderate the discussion today. Professor Robin Badham is the Carnot Professor of Engineering at the University of Melbourne, where he provides leadership at the interface between the university and industry and the government. His research interests are mining, mineral processing, and energy systems. Professor Badham was the Chief Scientist of Australia for 6 years and has worked in senior positions in industry, government, and has chaired and continues to contribute to many reviews, boards, and committees. He has chaired the selection panel of the Australia-India Strategic Research Fund several times, as well as being a member of the Australia-India Council. Without taking much of your time, I now hand over the program to Professor Robin Badham, who will introduce the panel, but also take care of the rest of the program. Thank you, Robin.
Ashok, thank you for the introduction, and let me also add my welcome to all the attendees and especially to our 4 panel members. And when it comes time for their individual presentations, we'll introduce them one by one. What I'd like to do now in this session is open it by setting the scene from a very personal perspective. I've been associated with the Australia-India Strategic Research Fund for a long time and with the Australia-India Council for a long time. So what I'm sharing with you is a personal perspective. This is not any official, here's what you need to do to make sure that your grant application gets through. This is just a bit of Badham's views of the world. So I do emphasize that. So let me start with the AISRF. And I think you probably all know that it's actually Australia's largest single country grant scheme. It's also one of the most long running. And that's very interesting because it tells you that India and collaboration with India is actually very much front of mind of the Australian government and has been for a long time. And it deals in quite large sums of money. The money is balanced on both sides. Both governments have to agree to a project. We all know that. And they both contribute in adjusted terms, effectively the same amounts of money. From the Australian side, the grants can be anything from some few hundreds of thousands up to $1 million. We have had special rounds where the grants have been up to a couple of million. We don't have institutional rounds at the moment, and I think that's a bit of a pity because there's quite some scope there. So if I share my screen, we'll see how that works. So it's that one. So is that now shared? It looks fine to me. Simone, could you perhaps comment that has shared?
I can't see your screen, no.
Okay, so what's happening?
Can the other panelists? Oh, there we go. Now I can.
Okay, so you've now got the screen titled Longest Running and Largest Single Country Grant Scheme. Thank you, Simone. What I'd like to emphasize here is that the selection for this is very rigorous. This is, for those of you, and you all will be familiar with it, this is really pretty similar to applying for a major ARC grant. It is peer reviewed, so they go out for refereeing. You have on the panel always people who are expert in the priority areas for a particular round, and you'll have 2 or 3 experts in each of the priority areas. And they divide the applications up between them. Each application is seen by at least 2 of the panel, plus external people. And within each section, they get together and they sort out their rankings so that when it comes to the overall selection process, every priority area is already ranked. And then my job is the simple one of leading the panel to moderate between the priority areas. Now, interestingly, the Indian side is also very rigorous and also involves a lot of peer review, but it's not quite the same process. They go through a panel session which shortlists those that are considered of real interest. And then for each one, they have a separate panel who go out and interview the applicants. That's also a very rigorous process. The 2 lists then are jointly worked over by the departments, the 1 department in Australia and 2 in India, to come up with an agreed ranking, which then goes to the ministers in both countries, 2 in India and 1 in Australia, who agree the process. So you're looking at something which really is fairly rigorous. Now, to advance it. But if we look at the Australia-India Council grants, these are about 1/10 the size, or sometimes into 100,000 or so, but they're generally much, much smaller. And this doesn't go through the same sort of process. Every grant is reviewed by the Secretariat, by the posts that the grant is relevant to. This is the diplomatic posts, the High Commissioner posts, and the consular posts in India, and by board members, with the chair seeing all of them and the deputy chair seeing all of them, and then individuals like myself being given 30 or so grants to go through. And then we all get together, and this year the shortlists are going to be invited to give very brief venture capital style pitches to the council to help us decide the final list. But I emphasize that this is not a peer-reviewed process. This is more, does it fit what they're asking for? Does it sound like it's going to have impact? And we're all very cognizant of the fact that you can't do with $50,000 what you can do with $500,000 or more. So let me move on and give you very personal comments about what gets through and why, emphasizing this is not an official position. Now, pretty obviously, any grants you put in have got to be aligned with the stated strategy and priorities. It's pointless, and it's actually quite annoying when people put in grants that just don't align with what is stated on the website and what is well-known knowledge. Now, the next thing to remember is that in the AISRF in particular, but also with the AIC grants, these have got to be supported on both sides. With the AISRF, of course, it's got to be a genuine collaboration and demonstrably a very real collaboration, not just a one-way transfer. As with ARC and NHMRC grants, cash contributions can be very meaningful. Now, this is not to say that in-kind is meaningless. I'm not saying that. In-kind can be very important as well. But when people go to the trouble of actually putting quite a bit of cash on the table, that certainly makes you sit up and take notice. I find occasionally people, leaders of projects, being listed at 0.5 full-time equivalents. And I wonder seriously what sort of input they can give. I think, again, a bit as with ARC and the like, if you can't see particularly the leaders putting in 0.2 full-time equivalent, then it does harm the credibility of the application. You do have to be careful with language. My language today, I'm not being particularly careful about it, but I'm not using words like huge, enormous, incredible, etc. And I've got to tell you, you see those in grants. And when superlatives are thrown around liberally in a grant, it actually destroys credibility. So on to my last slide. And so what you've heard is me speaking. What I'm showing you here, without, of course, turning it into a public document, is just some of the sort of examples of language that you can see. Enormous potential, shift perceptions, and so on. That's huge economic potential. And so on, significant co-funding. Some of what's written there is reasonable, and some of it I would suggest is not. One should be careful how many times one uses words like enormous, huge, and the like. They're quite a turn-off to people that have got to go through 50 or even 100 or more applications and rank them based on the substance that's in them rather than the color, the colorfulness of the language. It's also, to emphasize the point, these are taken from actual evaluations. The project outcomes are unclear. I think always with a project, and these are my closing comments, and it doesn't matter whether we're talking AISRF or the AIC, I would sum up a lifetime of evaluating projects to say you ought to be able to spell out the whole project in one sentence, preferably a question, which you then answer in one sentence. And that describes the whole project. Being forced to describe projects in 40 to 100 words is a great discipline. It really sharpens all of us up. And the other side of that particular point is that the outcomes should be equally clear. Outcomes that are very general, such as this will foster universal collaboration opportunities between the two countries, are almost meaningless. So I think that's enough from me, from my perspective of having been involved for many years in the selection process. What I'll do now is stop screen sharing and get out of that. All right. What I can't do is get, okay, is stop screen sharing, which I presume has happened. And we'll get through now into our panelists. And these four that we're going to hear from now are, of course, all actual heroes, because they are winners of grants and know exactly what it is to get through what is a very tough hurdle. So without further ado, let's hand over first to Surinder, Dr. Surinder Chauhan, Senior Lecturer at the School of Agriculture and Food in the University of Melbourne. So your turn now for screen sharing. Thanks, Surinder.
Thank you, Robin. It's really a pleasure to be talking in front of you, and thanks for the introduction. So I'm gonna mainly share my experiences and also some of the things that I have done through my first Australia-India Council grant, which was awarded in 2019. Just quickly want to share my mission, why I am interested in Australia-India partnership. And the reason for that is that I was born and brought up in India and trained as a veterinarian in one of the northern states of India, border of India and China, Himachal Pradesh, and worked as a veterinarian with the farmers in Himachal Pradesh for 10 years. And it was actually Australia which transformed my career as a researcher through this Australia Awards, which is basically a PhD scholarship that I was awarded in 2011 by the DFAT Australia AIC. And that was my journey of Australia. And then when it comes to research grants, when I started my career as a researcher at the Ohio State University, and my mentor, Professor Ratan Lal, who actually was awarded the World Food Prize last year, he said first thing to me, Surinder, that when you have to write a grant, always look for the mission of the funding bodies. And that's what I want to share with you, that every funding body has a mission that they are trying to achieve. And it is this mission that if we can help them to achieve that mission, then our grant is likely to be successful. And that's why I want to share, this is the mission of Australia-India Council, which is clearly to advance Australia's foreign and trade policy, but mainly building by awareness and understanding between the people and institution of Australia. And to achieve that mission, there are some objectives which are quite helpful to understand what we want to address in our grants, as Robin said. And of course, the first one is, again, awareness of Australia in India and India in Australia. As Robin said, it has to be both way. And collaboration is another objective, the collaboration between people and between organization of any any field which is of relevant to the bilateral relationship. And also the objective is to demonstrate the Australian excellence in science or in any field to the influential audiences in India. And then of course the community involvement and private sector involvement is another very important aspect of it. So to achieve those objectives, that has to be our focus. When I wrote my grant, I tried to have those things in there. And the key requirements for our participants who are aspiring to apply for this grant in future. So the key requirements are, of course, that as Robin also mentioned, that we need to have a partner, or we need to collaborate with someone in India. But the difference with Australia-India Strategy Grant here is that only the Australian organization or Australian residents or permanent residents or citizens can apply for this grant, so not from India. But of course, India is one of the partner. And very important thing to consider for Australian who is going to apply for this grant, and early on to get a support letter if you have a partners in India, which is seen as a very positive. And also, if you are applying on the behalf of a university in Australia, you need a support letter from your university. You need a capability statement from your university in that particular area, and a letter from your research office. For this grant, as Robin mentioned, I'm not sure it's for the peer review, but you are asked to submit 2 independent referee reports. So that's another good thing, that, and also it's good idea to get on that in early. And I have realized that in Australia-India Council grant, as with other government grants, it's important to focus on the gender balance. I think Australia-India Council recommends minimum 40% participation, even in your, if you are running any workshop. And of course, involvement of some VIPs or communities in your activities that you are planning to do in Australia or in India. And again, here also the focus is that this is a opportunity for you to build your collaboration between the two countries, but you have to demonstrate that you have long-term plans and you have plans that how you will manage the risk. COVID was the perfect this time to test our capability to, keep maintaining those relationships and how you will sustain it after your grant, is over. So just to share with you my experiences, what I did. So this was the grant that I was awarded. Of course, our team was awarded in 2019, and this was to transfer of mitigation technologies for heat stress in farm animals. So we collaborated with, and we are collaborating with, our National Institute of Animal Nutrition and Physiology, which is governed by the Indian Council of Agriculture Research. And our aim, of course, was to promote collaboration and partnership through the technical workshops on the mitigation of technologies to reduce heat stress, which is a huge challenge for with the global warming and these heat waves that the animals are suffering, especially during summer, both in Australia and India. And so we discussed all the strategies that have been already adopted here in Australia, how those can be adopted in India, and also learned what India has offered in this space. So first workshop we did in India, and we were lucky to organize this just before COVID in February. So a team of University of Melbourne, our team, we went to Bangalore, and we were fortunate to get Director General of ICR, Dr. Mahapatraji. He came, he's also the Secretary of Department of Agriculture, Research and Education, Ministry of Agriculture. So he was the chief guest along with Professor Frank Danshe, who is a Redmond Barry Professor, University of Melbourne, and Chair of Agriculture. And we were able to attract around 50 participants from different states of India, not just from Bangalore. And we had a great session in terms of 3 days lectures and also discussion. And we came up with a compendium, a book, which has been developed. And the second workshop, which was supposed to be in Melbourne, but unfortunately, due to COVID-19, we could not invite our Indian partners to Melbourne, but we went for a virtual workshop, which was done actually last month only here in this campus where I am right now. So we did as a virtual workshop, which worked pretty good. And we got around 42 participants from, so this is the advantage of when you go virtual, that just involving India and Australia, we were able to attract some speakers from different countries and some participants, including from Germany and China and Germany, and also from Ghana. But there were some requests from other countries as well when I posted it on LinkedIn. But unfortunately, as you know, the time different zone is a challenge, but we were able to supply them the presentations and some recordings as well. And Professor Ashok was one of the invited speaker from University of Melbourne. And our Dean, Professor Brian Lurie, Deputy Dean, sorry, he was also one of the speakers of this session. So in terms of what we have achieved so far from this collaboration, 3 of the PhD students, actually 2 of them are sitting right now in this hall, probably you can't see them, Alina and Pragna and Archana, they all did their masters at National Institute of Animal Nutrition in Bangalore, and currently are taking PhD with us here at University of Melbourne and have been awarded international scholarship. We already have published 2 papers with our collaborators in India, and we are currently working on policy paper, which is actually part of the acquittal of that grant and a final report. And we have been successful in securing a small grant from University of Melbourne, which is India Engagement Seed Grant. And I'm glad that I'm in this session with other panelists, because next target, we are also looking for Australia-India Strategic Fund. So, yep, that's all I have to say, and happy to take any questions. Thank you.
So Surinder, thank you for that. And let's move straight through the panelists, I think, and then we'll have the Q&A at the end of the session. So let's move now to Professor Maria Varua from the Western Sydney University. Thanks, Maria.
Okay, thank you, Robin. I think most of the things that I have to say has already been pointed out by Professor Robin and Dr. Surinder. The project that we actually had a grant is entitled Connecting Women Social Entrepreneurs in India and Australia. Before this, I actually have been working in India since 2011 on an AISRF project entitled Manage Aquifer Recharge through village level intervention. So that was my interest as to why we actually go for this India-Australia grant. Prior to that as well, we have successfully able to get a grant from Australia-Vietnam Council on connecting women entrepreneurs in agribusiness. So this is the second grant that I have with the Australia Council. So some of the things that I've learned is that, as Professor Robin was saying, you need to familiarize yourself with a grant. Unlike a research grant, the AIC grant promotes people-to-people links and a contemporary and positive image of Australia to support the Australian government. So it's a bit different from the usual research grant that we submit. It would also be helpful to access the website and read up on projects that have been successful, look at the language that they've used in writing the proposal, and also look at what are the different things that you could bring into your own proposal that has not been done before. But remember as well that every year, the strategy or the focus of the AIC could be different. So it would be a good idea to actually go through what is the focus for that year. So the third thing that you need to do is to also understand the assessment criteria, because each year there seems to be something different in the criteria. The focus is different. So it would be good to actually address what is being asked of you. So they list down some of the priorities that they normally would like you to address for that particular year. It also would be good to establish a partner in India early on. So in my case, we actually try to reach out on the institution where the university has a memorandum of understanding. And then we started discussion with our counterparts in India. So by the time that the call was made, we actually some sort of understanding as to what we're going to do in case the things that we actually have mutual interest would be on the focus for that year. So to organize a team that has the capability to deliver the project, evidence of past collaboration of the team is essential. So for our case, even though we didn't have a collaboration of the team between India and Australia, the Australian team has worked together and the Indian team has also worked together. But I should say that the Indian and Australian team has also cooperated in relation to teaching. So that was the collaboration that we had prior to this AIC grant. Demonstrate experience in capacity and development of the program. So the team in India had successfully delivered training programs as well, and it's also gender related. And the team in Australia has done that in relation to the Australian-Vietnam Council grant. Experience in running training and workshop would be advantageous. So in our submission, we were able to show that we have actually successfully run an Australia Council project. Seek good referees reports both in Australia and India. And I think Dr. Zurender has emphasized on that they need to be able to say that the teams are actually capable of delivering what they said they will deliver. And another thing I think would be helpful is to emphasize in your in your CV the aspects of training, capacity building experience that you have in a developing country, especially if you have an experience in in India. That would be a good way. So I think that's it. I think most of the things that are relevant has already been covered, and I'm happy to answer questions. Oh, by the way, our project will develop connections and shared knowledge among Indian and Australian women social entrepreneurs. So we did the first phase already, but the Indian counterparts were not able to travel to Australia. So we will be doing online, which is next month. So we've
okay. Maria, thank you very much for that. And you make some very good additional points there. And particularly one that I should have mentioned, that the focus does tend to change each year for the AIC. And of course, every AISRF has its own separate priorities. So one really does have to look carefully at what's going on. Thanks. Let's move now to Professor Michael Blumenstein from the University of Technology, Sydney. Michael, thank you.
Thank you very much, Robin. And just wondering, is everyone able to see my screen?
Looks good to me.
Great, thank you. Look, I just wanted to also thank the organisers of this webinar and my panelists, colleagues who've presented. My presentation will be on the AISRF, or the Australia-India Strategic Research Funding Scheme, and my particular experiences with it. So hopefully I can also give some information that might be useful to people that are watching today. So hopefully you can see the second slide there. Just wanted to give you a view of the personnel that applied for our recently won AISRF scheme. Basically, we just signed the contract not long ago, and we are literally starting this year. We were awarded this grant last year, and we're very grateful for it. It contains a mix of people of very different disciplines and backgrounds. So I'm the lead on it, but actually a lot of the research relates to the area of water, which was one of the priorities, I believe, in the previous round. And obviously, well, hopefully, obviously for most people, the area of water is actually a massive priority for both countries. And we were very fortunate that we could, get a team together with the complementary skill sets, which I'll talk about a bit later. So the team in Australia is from UTS, University of Technology, Sydney, but from India, our collaborators are from IIT Gandhinagar and also ISI Kolkata, the Indian Statistical Institute. I wanted to share with you a little bit about the amount of collaboration that has happened prior to allow us to get to this stage, which was mentioned by Maria as well. This whole ability to demonstrate a track record of prior collaboration is extremely important. So this particular project was actually around two things. It actually sat in the climate change aspect as well, which was a very important area for that year's priorities. But it relates to water in the sense that we're looking at ways in which we can treat water and ensure that the water treatment has a low emission element to it. In this case, we're saying near zero carbon emissions and near zero liquid discharge of the brine, which is the post-processing material that comes out of the treatment of water for the purposes of, for example, desalination. Now, the issue of water treatment and the issue of having clean water and the fact that we've got to also navigate things like industrial wastewater and seawater and other things is an extremely important element for both countries. But if we could then say, all right, not only are we able to make inroads into treating the water with technology that's novel, that could benefit both countries and indeed other countries, The other element is that we really want to find a way where there is less effects on the environment, and that the water energy carbon nexus, which is linked to the climate change phenomenon, is decreased as much as possible, whilst at the same time the outputs of the process, which usually are cleaner water, the byproduct, which is the brine, is actually less harmful to the environment when it gets discharged. So that's the main element of that. I won't go through all of the detail in this slide, but I just wanted to say that Australia and India share common concerns around experiencing decreased rainfall, have high areas with high solar irradiance, and so there is this challenge about trying to develop a membrane technology which can actually take the advantage of solar powered energy to actually develop this technology. So now it's extremely important also for parts of the world which have remote areas. And of course, that again applies for Australia and India. So these are some of the statements. Also, the first few slides, first few dot points talked about what the successful outcomes of the project could do. Now, I also take into consideration Robin's earlier comments that we don't want to say this is the best thing in the world, this is extraordinary outcomes, and so forth, because it has to be realistic. But there are genuine elements of potential for economic benefits, including bolstering business investment, say in the renewable energy sector, which certainly is an Australian priority, and certainly in India as well. And of course, this whole business of a new energy and economic model for brine treatment activities, which also has a fantastic outcome for the environment and the climate change phenomenon. To give you an idea, myself and the team from ISI Kolkata, Professor Umapadapal, who was the lead there, we established a joint research cluster with ISI in 2019. And there is actually there's possibility of us, obviously COVID has affected some of our activities, but we had face-to-face workshops, we host co-funded PhD students, there's a separate lab in ISI that actually houses our joint PhD students. So there's actually a track record, but actually for me, it goes back probably over a decade and a half, where we've generated lots of publications and lots of other PhD student completions. But the formalization of that between UTS and ISI, I think, was an extremely important step in what we could demonstrate in the application. Also, Dr. Gayatri, Professor Ho-Kyung Sean, and VG from our Centre for Technology in Water and Wastewater have been working in the membrane technology area, whereas ours, sorry, I should have mentioned, is in the area of AI and data science, had been collaborating with the IIT team for many years as well. So a lot of this is certainly based upon prior relationships and demonstration of success through those relationships, but also the fact that there is this ability to share common interests for both countries, plus for the researchers, and involve students in outcomes which can be of mutual benefit. I probably won't go into detail because I know I'm running out of time, but I just wanted to show that the complementarity and commonality of our teams, it was all about the fact that there was, strong research backgrounds in things like membrane synthesis, resource recovery. And then from my side, and Professor Jinyang Lee and Professor Umapadapal, who is our partner, we had this ability to bring the data science, artificial intelligence, machine learning into the equation. And that's the other thing I really want to emphasize, is that this project actually took two disciplines which you could think are disparate, but actually have a lot to gain from each other. The data science, the predictive analytics, the ability to provide decision-making for the purpose of developing the membrane technology is actually a key essential part. So the actual cross-faculty and cross-university activity across disciplines, I think was an ingredient that was a novelty, which added an edge to the application. I think that's going to hopefully also show in the outcomes. As I said, this is a brand new grant, just started end of January, so we've just kicked it off at this stage. The other thing is we clearly mentioned our strengths in the application. We wanted to say that the CTWW, the Centre for Technology, Water and Wastewater, is ranked number 16th in the area of water reuse in the world. It's got a very strong track record in demonstrating success in the water technology space. And, you know, the work that we've done with the Joint Research Cluster in ISI, not only the outputs together that we did and the international collaboration over many years, but also in UTS's ranking in computer science, which, you know, houses the artificial intelligence data science. It's #1 in Australia and 13th in the world. I think being the expert, or, you know, one of the experts that can deliver the success of the project through collaboration across countries is a super important ingredient to the success of the application. So without further ado, I'll end it there, but more than happy to take any questions and appreciate the time and your attention today.
So Michael, thanks for that run through and the experiences that you've had on the Australia-India Strategic Research Fund. And I think what I've heard from all of the panelists is actually some very consistent stories. And if everyone played by the rules that the three of you have been talking about, I've got to tell you, it would make the selection job a lot easier. So nothing you have said has been wrong or poor advice. It's been absolutely the opposite all the way through. So some pearls of wisdom there. So let's open it up for questions. Simone, do you want to feed the questions and manage that side of it?
Yes, sure. So we have a question here in regards to budgets. So Mariana would like to ask if there are any tips or best practices in preparing budgets to successfully support the projects and applications.
So let me just open that, and then I'd actually invite the panelists to comment on how they worked up their budgets, so you can get some real practical experience from people who are successful. From looking at the applicants, I've got to say that budgets, look, they have to be realistic. We know what travel costs are, we know what equipment, we know what it costs to sort of put on seminars and so forth. And so if figures are, you know, 4 times or 5 times reasonable, you know, it doesn't cost, then you start to discount the whole budget. And that's a bit unfair, but that's just the way one reads things. So you have to be realistic. I have seen one case where somebody's travel was put in at $10,000. Well, for heaven's sake, even if you bought a first class ticket, assuming such a thing was possible, it wouldn't cost you $10,000 to fly from Australia to India and back again. So they've got to be realistic would be my comment there. But I invite comment actually perhaps fairly briefly, because we've got quite a few questions coming in on how our panelists knocked their budgets up.
Okay, I think Robin, you have covered it. So for us, when we first put in our application, there was travel. So you could actually go on the website and check how much it will cost to travel between the 2 places. So it's something realistic. And there is also a list of things that you could claim and things that you could not claim. So be aware of those lists. And when you plan what you're going to do, okay, then be realistic, get a quote of how much it will cost you to do a workshop, for example, how much accommodation would be. So get a quote beforehand and then put that in your budget.
Robin, could I just add to that? I totally agree with Maria, and Robin, I agree with your comments about the realistic nature. I forgot to mention one thing in my presentation for the AISRF. It's actually very also important to note that the Indian side has to prepare its budget as well, and it's not one application. So for those who've not seen one in practice, the Australian side for the AISRF prepares their budget, which has to be, like everyone said, realistic. For us, it was personnel. For us, it was travel. But the main thing is that we had to talk to our Indian partners and ensure that they're aware that the cost that they're putting in, which is in rupees, you know, it actually is equivalent to what they would have their rates as, which is quite different to the ones we put in the Australian context. And we did run into a bit of problems with that because, you know, it sounded like a lot of funding, but actually it wasn't as much as as we had hoped initially. So that Australian-Indian partner side budget needs to be carefully looked at. But as everyone said, be realistic, and what do you actually need to deliver the project?
Yeah, Robin, I agree with both Maria and Michael. So for Australia-India Council grant, the process is online application using Smarty Grants. And actually in there for budget section, it's very helpful that you have to clearly outline each activity, and then you have to justify amount that you cannot say like $3,000. You have to justify why are you asking for $3,000 and how many participants are involved in that travel. So I actually looked up on the online, what is the travel for Bangalore for one person, how much it's going to cost for our whole team of 4 people. We are staying there for 4 days, what it costs for a room in Bangalore. I mean, a decent room, of course. We can't travel business class here. This is economy travel, which is allowed. So yeah, it's easy, but very, very important is to make sure that we justify every dollar that we are asking for.
Okay, so moving on.
I might jump in, yes, because we do have lots and lots of questions and not a huge amount of time. So a question that keeps on coming up is, when will the AISRF round 14 be announced? And I'll also tie that in with another question that's been asked quite a bit about early career researchers and grants valid for them.
Okay, let me answer that one. It's very simple. I can't tell you. I'm well aware. I keep in touch with the department, but these things jump through all sorts of hoops, and you've got to end up with ministerial approval on both sides before anything is announced. So sometimes the process is fairly rapid, sometimes it's slow. We do expect the next round to be announced. Let me just say soon. In other words, it's not going to be next year, but it's not going to be, I doubt it, if it's going to be next week. I'm sorry, I can't be more helpful than that. By and large, on the early researchers, there is not a special scheme. However, I thought the Academy of Science, and one of the panelists might be able to help me here, actually does run an early researchers scheme, and that's with funding from the AISRF. Has anyone had experience of that? I've not personally had experience of it, but I think it does exist. It's a quite separate scheme. So
not sure, but I had one early career grant, but that's through University of Melbourne.
Okay.
I would just add, I haven't had experience with that, Robin, but I would just add that, in our case, we specifically had an early career researcher as part of the grant team. And so it's
yeah, but that was your choice, Michael.
Yeah, no, I know it's separate to the question, but I do think it's important to consider the composition of the teams.
I think it's important too, but at the moment, I think that aspect is handled under a separate scheme. Okay, thank you for that. Moving on.
So we have a question from John Canning. He asks, how much politics is needed? It's clear from conversation in India, if you aren't connected to the right people, you probably won't get funded.
Okay, well, as somebody who is strongly associated with the Australian side, let me very briefly tell you a story. At one stage, I thought, look, we really ought to have the identical system on both sides. And I tried for 1 or 2 rounds to make that happen. And we had joint meetings of selection panels, and so it went on. And in the end, I compromised and said, well, look, you run your process, we'll run ours. But we will never allow what I would call an AC. We will rank things, this is just conceptually, A, B, and C. And if we rank something A and you rank it C, then we have got to get together and talk that one through and figure out why. You can have an AB and a BA, or AA, BB, or CC. But you can't have an A from one side and a C from the other. And I've got to say, over quite some years, we have not had ACs, and it's pretty rare. So you do sort it out. But the Indian side, by shortlisting, with a panel of about 12 or 14 people, it can be argued that that's fairly political. that they might be selecting on the basis, well, you know, that place has had a turn, this place is new and it needs something, etc. Personally, I don't see the evidence of that, but I'm not involved in that side at that level of detail. On the Australian side, it is merit-based, full stop, end of story. And of course, you have a look to make sure that they're not all from one state. You would have to have a very good reason. But this is like looking at gender balance and the like. You don't go pedantically saying you must have, you know, 39.9% or whatever it is. You look at the broad thrust of where you're heading, because always you find that there are, say if we're talking AISRF, that there will be a handful of projects that are just utterly standout, just so overwhelmingly good that they just have to fly. And then you will have a bunch of projects that you just wish you had the money to fund them. But we don't have enough. And so you've got these most worthy projects that all are fundable. And it's in that area there that you might do a bit of mixing and match to balance up the priorities, for example. So to that extent, things happen, but it's certainly, I would not describe that as being the slightest bit political, at least on the Australian side. And I'm just not in a position to make any comments, good, bad, or indifferent, other than the fact that the Indian side just doesn't get rankings which are way off the scale compared with the Australian side. And so that's proof to me that there's a fair bit of rigor on both sides. Anyone on the panel want to make a very brief comment? Because I think we're all watching the clock here.
Yeah, Robin, I just want to make a very brief comment. I totally agree with you. The rigor on the Australian side, although I'm not on the selection panel, I'm more on the recipient panel on this stage. But interestingly, I've been applying for this scheme since around, I would have to say, 2010 or around there. So, and we only got the first one this year, and it was literally the first one that our university has ever got. And so the reality is the success rate is less than 5%, I think, or certainly less than 10%. And that's lower than AIC discoveries or even DECRAs. So it just goes to show that, you know, if you don't get it the first time, it's not a surprise. There is a lot, I think, that needs to be prepared over time, and the thought around the strategic element alignment with the calls and with the track record with the teams overseas, it all play a part. But it's hard, but it's worth trying.
Thank you for that, and I fully agree. Keep hanging in there. There is nothing that says in this selection process, that's a group of 8 university, therefore it gets an easier ride. Nothing whatsoever along that line. And indeed, we brought in something to make life a little bit easier. I think that a university could only put 1 application in to the AISRF. I noticed in the AIC, I thought we agreed to that, but I noticed in the current list that some people have snuck in more than 1, but we haven't had the selection meeting, so I'm not quite sure where that's going to end up. So next, please. Simone.
Yes, so we only have 5 minutes. So what I might do is ask a number of questions and then everyone can make a comment on whichever question they prefer. So panelists, if you have a pen handy, maybe jot it down. I'm going to read out a few. So the first one is, how mature does the relationship with the Indian partner have to be? And what kind of prior activities are most valued? And then we have another question, can Indian partners, collaborators come from the private sector? And are there priority areas that the project should address?
Okay, so the prior experience is not essential in either case, but it does give you credibility because you know what you're talking about. You know that it takes time to establish collaborations and for the money to flow, by the way. So it is not generally a requirement, but it adds to your credibility when you're talking about things. So that's a comment on that. In terms of private involvement. Certainly in the AIC, that's possible, and I think in the AISRF. There are, however, some very significant restrictions on the Indian side as to what private funding can be in, really quite significant and quite a restriction. The Department of Biotech had a pretty interesting approach, which was if there was a spin-off of some description that had started because of DBT funding, then they could be part of a project, but that was a sort of a sideways door or a backwards door, a back door. So that's a bit of a problem. Priorities, I really can't say what priorities are going to be in the AISRF, other than, watch the website. This gets thrashed out by the departments and then the ministers, and then put up for all to see.
I was wondering if I could just answer very quickly the first question again. Sorry, not again, but maybe add to what you've said, Robin, which is extremely valuable. My experience is we applied without a very long-term relationship 10 years ago. We then reapplied with a very mature relationship with 2 universities in India, and we got it. That doesn't necessarily represent cause and effect, but we also demonstrated, lots of published work over a long period of time, lots of PhD student graduations, and also an investment, in the relationship, not only through external sources, but through our own university's investment in partnership with the Indian institution. That must count for something, because it shows that something has gone on. There is some success that's already demonstrated, and a prior track record must add to the potential for success.
It adds credibility. There's no doubt about that, Michael. You're quite right.
Are we happy to take one more question?
Yeah, by all means.
So this one comes from Trent Brown, and so he says, further to the early career researcher question, I think the key roadblock is ECRs often do not have continuing positions at universities. Can AISRF money contribute to salary for a research fellow who may only have an honorary, casual or part-time position?
I'll have to throw over to the panel. I must confess I'm not dead sure on that. If that can be sent to us in writing, I can certainly get the department to give a clear answer on it.
I can just add to that we have we are funding PhD students and or some early career researchers for specific periods on the project, so that we've won, and so the funds can be used for that purpose. But I'm not sure if I've answered that question fully for that.
Yeah, but you can't extend them beyond the, you can have a PhD that you put on who then extends beyond the length of the project, and the time that they're beyond the length of the project, you've got to find the funds from elsewhere.
That's correct. That is absolutely correct. And that would be the case with most grants in this regard.
Okay, well, we've hit the witching hour, and I suspect that we could go on for quite some time. Can I suggest, if any of you have got burning questions that you'd really like a comment on, if you can email them to the AII, and they'll pass them on, and I'll either get the department to answer them, or if I'm able to do so myself, and likewise share them with our panelists who can have their 2 bobs worth. So somewhat rudely and without prior consultation with my panelists, what I'm suggesting is, if you've got unanswered questions, shoot them in on an email and we can all have a go at answering them. So from my point of view, let me hand back to Simone and Ashok, and thank you very much for your questions and for your attendance today. And I thank the panelists. Pretty obviously, they've been through the hoops and they actually know what they're talking about.
I think, I once again thank you all for your time and advice. I think we all got really good information for future grant applications. So on behalf of all the participants and also on behalf of the Institute, thank you all the panelists. And we hope to get some more information from the participants, get the questions from them and then send them to you, and looking forward to your help in future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
all good.
Thanks very
Thanks.
much.
Everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.